Welcome back to Tiempo. We've been discussing proposed new restrictions imposed by the Trump administration on Cuba, and these new restrictions affect travel, the amount of money that people can send to the island. Educating us this morning, our good friend John Gutierrez. He's a professor of Latin American Studies at John Jay College of Criminal Justice. Casey Champion from Chaco Travel, an agency that specializes to travel in Cuba. Let me ask you this, Casey, because one of the arguments that the State Department made for implementing these proposed changes is that under the previous categories of 12 that you can cherry pick and choose from to legitimize your trip to Cuba, that he was saying it was veiled tourism was the term that he used, that people were saying they were going for educational purposes when in reality they were going just to see the island.
Right. I mean, we don't really like that term at Chaco Travel. We definitely run reputable people-to-people travel, as do most of the big reputable companies. That's not to say that people aren't doing that. And, you know, it's a possibility that people are going and just checking a box and saying they're doing people-to-people and going. However, even in that case, I think it's an educational experience, yes. And I think that people can't go to Cuba and come back without having been changed and learning something. So.
And it does delegitimize the people who actually were going for arts and humanities, education, music, culture, humanitarian things, etc. Would you not agree?
Right. Yes and no, right? I think that we get hung up on this idea that going to Cuba, unless you go under these specific conditions, is somehow immoral. And the fact of the matter is that when you go, even if you're going on your own, and you rent out an Airbnb, you are supporting local commerce. You're supporting that local entrepreneurial class that you really want to succeed in Havana.
And all of the best restaurants as well. If you're going to eat, they're all privately owned.
Taxi drivers, the economy that keeps people with the ability to put food on their table. Sure. I think that that's the other thing that we're missing here, that the impact of this on people's ability to meet their basic needs, and basic needs that are not met by the Cuban government, is enormous, and we are cutting that off.
Casey, the changes, if they go into effect, would reduce non-family travel to Cuba. Have you already started to see either a cutback in some of the planned trips that you had coming up, or either travel agencies or flights or cruises cutting back?
We've had several emails of concerned clients, but as of now we're moving forward because there haven't been any changes. So it's just been statements by Mr. Bolton, and so until there's changes by the Treasury and there's laws in place, we're going to move forward.
What have you heard from airlines and cruise lines?
I have not heard anything, but I'm sure they're going to have their voice in this as well.
You've seen so you haven't seen a reduction in bookings just yet. That's good.
But I do think it will. We saw that when Trump made his last announcement, because you know, one of the things that they do is confuse people and scare people. So you know, people don't really understand the actual legal ramifications of what, and they just see headlines.
John, the administration's argument was that in reversing this policy, the previous policy banned Americans from staying in Cuban-owned hotels and shopping in Cuban-owned shops. And as a result, I think Airbnbs and Casa Particulares took off.
Sure.
So now it seems like
you're sending them back.
Yeah, we're almost going back in time.
To lining the pockets of the Cuban military, which runs the majority of these institutions. This policy makes no sense, Joe.
But that would counter exactly what they're trying
to accomplish. I don't understand the internal logic of this beyond the political considerations of what's happening in Florida in 2020. This is just, it doesn't make any sense. The majority of Cuban Americans, even in South Florida, adjusting for age, want more engagement because they realize that this policy, the historic policy of isolation, doesn't work. And so why are we going back to the status quo ante?
And we were talking about the irony, the fact that the hardliners in Cuba and the Trump administration are basically...
They've converged.
agree on something here.
Right.
Have they given you any indication when they say further regulatory changes to restrict non-family travel to Cuba? Have they given you indication of what those regulatory
Not
changes?
at all. That is extremely general. Last time they made changes in June 2017. Trump had, you know, specific changes. The Treasury Department came out with an FAQ that sort of explained what was going to happen. None of that has happened at this point. So I don't even know when that's going to happen. So, and even then, the laws weren't changed for another 5 months. So we're looking at, you know, possibly many months, a year until a change perhaps.
Yeah,
or
what
it
has
could
to
be
happen?
fast.
What are the checklists that need to go even to make the changes happen and take effect?
Well, I mean, you'd have to go through the process at the Treasury Department and OFAC, right, the Office of Foreign Assets Control. There will be a public comment session. Democrats control the House, so there may be hearings on these changes. Who knows? But this is, you know, this is also, let's put this within the context of what the Trump administration has historically wanted to do, which is to roll back any perceived accomplishment of the Obama administration, right? I mean, this is, you know, it's the Affordable Care Act, it's the tax cuts, it's Cuba policy, right? It's, I want to undo what my predecessor did. And this is yet another example, except that in this case, unlike in other parts of the government, the president has a substantial amount of control over foreign policy.
Yep.
So he has leeway here that he doesn't have in other sectors of the American government.
We got to wrap it up. If you, I'll put this. We'll end on a good note. If you want to go, Chaco
Now
Travel
is the
a good
time.
place to start. So now is the time. You know, you can find them online at your website. Correct. You can answer all the questions there and get in before the changes if they take effect. Un placer. Good to see you, my friend.
Encantado.
All right. Coming up next on Tiempo, a free after-school program that teaches STEM at the New York Hall of Science. It's fantastic. The details are next. Stay with us.